So why don't we begin with our blessing over Torah so that we can dive into this very last Torah portion of our year together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די די די. Welcome everyone, so good to see you. This week, we actually don't have a regular Torah portion, technically, right? Because we're in the middle of Sukkot, so it's a Sukkot Torah portion. But here's the thing. There's one Torah portion that we never, ever, ever have on a Shabbat. And that is the very last Torah portion in the Torah itself. And so today I thought, as we're finishing up this cycle of Torah, how nice would it be to actually have a Torah session on V'zot HaBracha, these last two chapters that we don't often have a chance to study. And there happens to be a final chapter in our Musar Torah commentary on exactly this. So we're going to focus on V'zot HaBracha and the midah of emunah, or faith. So let's just start with these early kind of ideas and questions that Rabbi Judith Edelstein brings into her Torah commentary. She said, after 22 years of chaplaincy and teaching, I've observed that most Jews, young and aged alike, would like to have faith, emunah, but they are also very confused and even fearful of it. So based on this quote, I'm just kind of curious, what are you thinking? Is Rabbi Edelstein right? Are people confused and even fearful of faith? Do you feel that way yourself?
Well, I think it's kind of, yes, I've observed people fearful of faith because it demands something of them that they think about faith, but you can't do it. You can't come to faith by thinking. So it's an emotional response. So it becomes very fearful sometimes to get deep inside yourself and say, what do you have faith? What is faith? So it is scary. It can be scary because it's very demanding of the heart and soul, but not necessarily of the mind.
Thank you, Larry. Any other thoughts? Michael, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, what I was thinking of was here we are, human beings talking and about this and that and faith and whatever. But, like I'm just saying from a scientific point of view, when you get down to the 1 or 2 cell organisms and even smaller than that, where did they all come from and so on? So for me, it's easier for me to say to myself, and to believe that I have faith that there is God, that it just wasn't all an accident that life exists, but it was intentional. So for me, it's easier, in that sense.
So you found some things that do make sense and they're a little bit more tangible, perhaps.
Yeah, and it all depends on what time of my life I'm thinking about this. When I was didn't really have much participation at all beyond bar mitzvah and whatever in Reform Judaism, and even as a young parent. But maybe in my middle 30s and beyond, when my son started Hebrew school in Temple Bethel, and so I realized that there's more to life than just me and Sandy and what we are and do, and that I became a person of greater faith as I matured.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, Jessica, what did you want to bring in?
Well, I was just going to say, faith in God requires a belief in God. And I think that a lot of young people today, my experience with young people is limited to mostly high school and middle schoolers, and my own children. They are not believers in God. So faith is something that they pull back from. They don't have faith in God. And as for the creation of life, I recommend just this for the other side of the story. The physical chemist, he's a Brit, I think, Peter Atkins, has written a wonderful book called Creation, and in which he explains why we have what we have here. He explains creation from a chemical and physics point of view, chemistry and physics. It's very interesting. I highly recommend it. I think it's used on Amazon. You can get it. I'm done.
Yeah, Jay, go ahead. Thank you so much, Jessica.
You're welcome.
What Jessica said about the kids, I think, is totally right. A lot of my students I work with, in fact, in religious school, I don't think we spend a lot of time talking actually about the word faith. We'll talk about God a little bit, but I think the word faith is a word we need to bring back a little bit. And for people to understand the important thing of having faith. I use it a lot in my top 5s that I do every day. Because it's something that I think my faith has been very helpful in surviving these last couple of years. But I totally understand what Rabbi Edelstein's saying here. Edstein. I think I said her name. Edelstein.
Yeah, it's Edelstein. I made a typo here that I was trying to fix, and I can't at the moment.
That's okay. We're all human. But there is a lot of confusing ideas of faith. And I think that's why a lot of young people decide, well, I'm not going to try to get into understanding faith because I'm confused about it, and it's easier just to be agnostic.
Although agnostic is a form of faith too, right? So I want to get back to something that was brought up, because there's been a lot of really interesting ideas in this conversation we've had that really run the gamut, and we're going to go into many of them, I think, over the course of this conversation. But there's one overarching question that I just want us to sit with of, what is faith really? Does faith require a specific belief? Does emunah require a specific belief?
Requires a lot of trust.
Okay. But those two things, I don't know, are they the same? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. So I just want us to keep that question in the back of our heads and to check in with that as we go a little bit further into some of the text that we're going to explore today. So shortly after that early text, maybe in the next page or two, Rabbi Edelstein offers this. Rabbi Yeroham Levovitz of Mir maintained that emunah describes a feeling of absolute certainty, so that there is no room in one's heart for any doubt whatsoever. Before we even look at the commentary that she offers here, and I know I might be saying this a little too late already, is what do you make of that statement? What do you make of Rabbi Meir's understanding here?
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Certainty. Wow. No, I think there's tremendous room for doubt, and doubt leads to all kinds of good questions. Extremely certainty sounds like extremism, sounds like a position that you're certain about. Other people are going to be certain about other positions. I do not like that word certainty. It leads down the wrong kind of path.
Does everyone have a similar reaction to Larry's?
Do we
Yeah.
know when Rabbi Levowitz was saying this? How far back it was, or is that recent?
It is, I mean, it's more modern. I don't have the years though. This isn't like a 6th century. It's not a really old.
Well, what I'm getting
but I
at,
don't know the
I
dates.
think over the centuries, this has changed. A few hundred years ago, this would have been more accurate in general than what it is today.
I'm trying to get up the date and I'm not
Would
going to
the-
be able to do this as quickly as I'd like.
Would there be more doubt in for people of our culture and religion than perhaps in some other religions, like Christianity and so on? I have a feeling, without really knowing about those religions, just a gut feeling that there is more of a feeling of, it says, absolute certainty that they have of their faith in what and who they believe in. But this is a guess on my part. I just have it's just.
I would agree, because we've always been instructed, for hundreds of years,
Yeah.
to discuss. When you go to an Orthodox school, that you're
Yeah.
paired up. You always have another study buddy, always, that you argue back and forth with.
Okay.
You're
There you go.
encouraged to discuss these things, and that's consistent with what you just said, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So just hold on one second, Larry, just
Sure.
so that we know. Rabbi Yeraham Leibowitz, that was in the late 1800s to early 1900s. We're
Not
talking
that long.
Belarus, that area. Okay.
Right.
I knew it was semi-modern. I just didn't know the exact date. So there they are. Sorry, go ahead, Larry.
I think that's even changing in other religions. So there are very, very conservative religions, by conservative, that tends to want to be certainty. But there's also a liberal streak in many other religions that want to question, they want to think about it, they want to experience, and it is something that changes with time, Michael, because people have experiences which show them the path of certainty can be very, very tricky. So I think it's growing. Jews have always been, I believe, questioning and doubt. There's a book I've read, that The Sin of Certainty, by a Christian author. The Sin of Certainty. There's lots of books now written about the value of doubt. And we
So
learn-
if we're certain about something, right, we can have a calmness that goes with it. We don't have to question everything. We're certain, we're good. We know we're on the right path. Like it takes away so much stress from everyday life if we're certain, right?
Yes, it does.
But what Rabbi Edelstein points out is exactly what you've been saying, right? Especially for contemporary liberal Jews, because this is more of a question of liberal Jews than it is of Orthodox Jews, although Orthodoxy definitely makes room for doubt and question. That is absolutely true. But we see it more in the forefront, I think, even regular in our everyday. So Levivitz's notion is precisely what troubles contemporary Jews. We live in a society where absolute certainty often leads to extremism, and we know how divisive and destructive this can be, right? Yet there is a deep human desire to own strongly held conviction, with its potential to make life richer.
Sure, comfortable. That's comfort. I don't live for comfort. I live for challenges.
But it says something else. It doesn't just say comfort here. It actually says to have strongly held conviction with potential to make life richer. What is Rabbi Edelstein saying with that?
I don't know what Rabbi Edelstein is saying, but I don't know. This is like, I think life is not static at all. I think it is ever changing. It's part of the reason why in Judaism we argue stuff back and forth all the time, because it broadens your perspective. So I didn't grow up with a whole lot of God and not God. There was kind of an acceptance that there was a God, whatever that was. And most of my personal understanding of God. So I'm going to speak from the personal understanding of God point of view. So a little bit of the evolution of it came in my second year of being in rabbinic school. So that would have put me in my late 60s. And I had accepted for some time that there was a God because I didn't see any reason why there wouldn't be a God. It made sense, and I call it God, and other people call it other things, and maybe it's a number of people, maybe it's not. But for me, that was okay. And I was driving down the 405 back from school to go teach at a school, actually. And all of a sudden, I was thinking about this kind of, and all of a sudden, what popped into my mind is when I have something or someone that I really like, that's important to me, something that enriches my life, I would say to that person, I love you. And all of a sudden I said, what would it be like if I said, I love God? What would that be like to me? Well, frankly, I almost drove off the freeway right into the ditch next to it. It was so stunning to me. And so how I see what is God for me, for who I am and what I do and all of that, it is a very personal thing, but it is not static. It is not static. And I think as science learns more and more and more about where things come and where they go and how they're related to each other, I think that has a time when sometimes it used to be, well, everything, God made everything. Well, I'm not in the land of God made everything. I'm in a land that there is a God, that I have a relationship with God, but it is how it's like how things develop with how you have a relationship with anyone or anything that you work closely with. And it isn't always good. Sometimes you get angry, but the bottom line for me is there, and for me, that is very comforting, and it is very important in the work that I do.
So what's so interesting about, there's a lot that you brought in there, so much that you brought in there that is worthy of conversation and reflection. But this whole idea that certainty is not necessarily about a fact, right? That's not the only kind of certainty that exists.
Right.
Perhaps there's certainty in relationships, which are ever changing.
Right.
Right. So let's go through our text a little bit more to maybe kind of refocus what emunah actually is. Okay. So the first instance of the word emunah, not in that form, in a slightly different form, but the word itself, which means faith, the very first time it appears in the Torah is in the story of Abraham and Sarah. That's not all that surprising, because Abraham and Sarah, of course, have faith enough to go on this big journey, upend their entire life, and to really place their faith in God. So in Genesis 15, it's a little bit into the story already, we come to these verses. Would anyone like to read this? Thank you, Steve.
Oh, go ahead.
Sometime later, the word of Adonai came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. But Abraham said, O Lord, Adonai, what can you give me, seeing that I shall die childless, and the one in charge of my household is Damesk Eliezer. Abram said further, since you have granted me no offspring, my steward will be my heir. The word of Adonai came to him in reply, that one shall not be your heir. None but your very own issue shall be your heir. Then in the vision of God, he took him outside and said, look toward heaven and count the stars. If you are able to count them, continuing, so shall your offspring be. And he put his faith in Adonai, who counted it to him for righteousness.
Okay, so we're looking specifically at this final verse right here. That after all of this long conversation that well, not that long of a conversation, but this conversation that they just had, that God and Avram had, it says that Avram put his faith in God, who counted it to him for righteousness. So how do you understand Avram or Abraham's faith in this verse? What did it look like?
Well, to me, it looks like Avram is which one is he? Abraham or Avram is going to have a child, will have a child. He has faith that things will be straightened out. And this fellow Eliezer's offspring will not be his heir, but that he will have a child of his own body, or actually Sarah's. But so it's I see this as sort of a limited faith. This issue of childless. Sorry.
So you're saying that he has faith in the statement that God just said to him.
Yes.
That's what the faith is.
Yes. Thank you. I could have said that, but I didn't think of it. So wandering around.
No, that's perfect. Anyone agree, disagree with that?
I wanted to say that I looked back at, I don't know whether it was last year or whenever. I just have this my notes, and it was mentioned before, but along with faith, there's trust, bitachon, and I think this is what is going on with Avram. He has to trust in what God has told him. Along with his faith, one goes along with the other, doesn't it?
Yes.
So you're saying the faith isn't necessarily limited to the words that are being said here,
Right.
but it's actually a growing trust in God.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So there's different ways of understanding this, and the Torah doesn't give us a whole lot, right? Jessica's interpretation of this and your interpretation of this, Michael, they both have a lot of merit to them. We don't totally know. We just have to use our own judgment based on what's there. But there's another piece to this that's kind of interesting. Why is this counted to him for righteousness? What is that all about? The word is tzedek, right? For righteous.
Right.
Tzedek, it's tied with tzedakah. It means righteousness. It means like doing the right thing, being upright.
Would it have something to do, because I think of the term unwavering faith. And so he doesn't question or challenge this experience that he's had with God, because he says in the vision, God took him outside and said, look toward heaven and count the stars. I mean, it's beautiful. And then he puts his faith in Adonai, who counted it to him. So to me, it's like, because Abraham's response was, in our faith, we say the correct response, He responded in faith. It was unquestioning. I mean, he wasn't questioning who God was. He's having this conversation with him. So he's already gotten past that point. I mean, he's accepted God, right? So, it's like unwavering faith, trust, and probably a sense of hope. All right, if you say this is going to happen, I believe you. And so how many times does that happen in your life where you're facing an impossible situation and someone says to you, just, have faith, it's going to work out. I mean, I don't know how many times that happens.
But it's also a two-way thing. I think this is saying that God has faith in Avram as well, or something like that, because Avram left his nation, his family, his home. I don't remember the order. He left everything and did what God said. And so he's demonstrated the ability to have faith in God. And I think this is saying sort of, well, God has faith back in Avram.
So
Yeah,
it's a relationship in two directions, you're saying?
Yes, definitely. It has to be a two-way direct relationship for us. Otherwise it won't work.
Yeah, Cornelia, go ahead.
Yeah. So what bothers me in this discussion is that we're assuming that God is some sort of figure out there. And that's the way this part of the drama is written too. God speaks to Abraham. Abraham thinks that God is speaking to him. And to me, that's just magic. I can understand it's nice that Abraham has trust in somebody or some figure that he admires. But I can't, where's Abraham hearing this from? Is it this kind of, some sort of insane man, Abraham, that he's imagining this? If I think of God, I like to think of God as some kind of process, but I have trouble thinking of God I don't think of God as a being out there. And though I have trouble with this passage.
Well, earlier it said that he had a vision. God came to Avram in a vision.
Okay, that's a good point.
Whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The Torah has so many different conceptions of God. And it could be that a lot of these conceptions of God are not ones that speak to us individually. And so when that happens, how do we make sense of it for ourselves? Is there something within there that we can learn from it? I want to just point out one quick thing, Marla, I see your hand, which is, I'm going back to the text itself. We stopped off right here with verse 6. Just for the sake of clarity, you'll notice that 2 verses later, Abraham actually does ask some questions of God, questioning him a little bit, saying, oh God, how shall I know that I'm to possess it? And the rabbis kind of grapple with that too. How could Abraham be questioning God if Abraham has this perfect faith in this moment? Is it really questioning? Is it something else? It's just adding a little bit more complexity to it. But yes, go ahead, Marla.
So my thinking might be a bit pediatric, but when I reflect on what we're teaching children with the story of the little engine that could, the repetition in that story by the engine lugging those toys up the mountain is, I think I can, I think I can. That experience for me is my definition of my relationship with God. It's when that person in my life encouraged me, or when I was down, lifted me or allowed me to lift myself with their commentary. I believe at those moments in time, I was connecting or seeing or emotionally attaching to God. I can't define it for you. I can't give you a concrete definition. But I think these questions that Abraham might have towards God is, I begin to question myself in doing something. I think of coaches who tell their teams they're going to make it, they're going to score, they can, they're the best, whatever. I don't think God is in the game, and I don't think you pray to God to make a touchdown. I hope not. And I don't even think you thank God for a touchdown, quite frankly. but it's that what you do to derive that energy to do what's right.
So are you reading that into the relationship with Abraham and God in this text?
For me, yes, it's the notion, it helps me define faith. It helps me understand better who and what God is. And what happens when that moment in time says, I think I can. Where did that come from? I think it comes from my belief in something that I don't understand and that's far stronger than myself.
Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
I was wondering if this doesn't kind of demonstrate Abram's development of faith, culminating in Akedah later on, where that's the extreme, where he's willing to sacrifice his only son. Here, maybe not quite as developed yet. It's new. It came to him in a vision all of a sudden, and here we go. That's quite a bit to accept all at once.
So faith is something that slowly builds upon itself over time.
That would seem reasonable to me.
Yeah. Yeah, Frank, what do you want to add?
I was going to say, and it's in knowing and reading the story, that to me, God is faith. Like that, there is no, not this intimate. I mean, he's not this being, right? God is faith. It's my dependence upon Him, and I use Him just because that's what we say. I don't know, but I know that the faith that I have is what allows for God to work in my life, which means I treat people better. I treat people different. Sorry, phone call. That I treat people differently. I treat people kindly because I have a faith that this is real. And then on the part about, eventually when, Abraham, he becomes Abraham, that when I really dived into this story where God keeps his promise to Abraham, like he says that, your children will be as many as the stars. And I think about how, just take the leaders of the world, just to bring that in. How many leaders of the world are of the Abrahamic faith? It's 87% of the countries have 80, or they might be of a Christian belief. It doesn't matter. The point is that, or Islamic faith. Like he kept the promise to this man that there's billions of us that are part of the Abrahamic religion now. So I always know that that's one of the first promises that's kind of kept in the book that allows me to know that this book, this is real, right? And it always, my faith is built off of that story. I kept that with me. I'm knowing that he did promise true to him, to have that almost not blind faith because it's coming to him, but the faith that I'm going to do what this thing tells me to do. And I want to add something real quick because we talked about where it talks about becoming extreme or extremist. The way that I feel that you don't become an extremist is I don't have to ever tell someone they need to believe in my path towards Hashem. I don't ever need to do that to anybody. Hopefully they can look and see that I have a good path because of the way I treat other children of God. But I don't need to ever say, you need to believe this way. Right? I don't tell anybody that. I never tell anyone how they should believe. I just know that my path is need to know that everyone has their own path. And that keeps me from, I guess, being extreme on it. But then I know 1,000,000% that Hashem is real. Like I know for a fact in my life. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I know it also from that story where his faith was, I'm going to do what he says. I'm going to go do this. And he kept that promise. I mean, there's a billion of us that say we're of the Abrahamic belief. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I don't know that Abraham had a blind faith. There were
Not a-
moments where you can question that, right?
Right.
Like the Akedah, for instance, you can say, I don't know exactly what was going through his head when he was going up to sacrifice his son over there. But there's lots of cases where he questions God. And so maybe it's possible to have a deep faith that isn't fundamentalist, that isn't blind.
Mhm.
Was there another hand that I missed? Okay, I can only see a few people at a time, so please jump in if I don't see you.
Well, I was just going to say that, we know that having deep faith leads to perhaps the right choices that we make in life. And then by making the right choices, we could set an example and others can see the choices we made, and maybe they'll emulate those choices in their own lives. Towards Tikkun Olam, towards whatever, to making our lives and the world a better place.
Beautiful, exactly. And I think that's also, Frank, what you were getting at with what you were saying as well.
Yeah.
And I think Abraham also did that. He had all of these followers, not necessarily because he told them to follow, but because they were inspired by him. That's what a lot of the commentaries say. So there's a couple of different interpretations to bring in here of what was going on with Abraham's faith. Sforno said he believed, he had utter confidence that God would fulfill his promise, even if it required a miracle. He just really trusted in God here, right? He put his confidence in God. Dr. Menachem Kellner wrote that the emunah spoken of in this verse is more than belief that certain statements about God are true. It is belief in God, trust and reliance upon God, all of which call forth behavior consistent with the stance of trust and reliance. So it's not saying, I believe in God. That was not the point of his faith here, right? It was beyond that. It was one of relationship, one of deepening trust all of the time. And Rabbi Avraham ben Harambam, say that a few times fast, right? He said, the highest goal of life is a personal experiential relationship with God. Just found that to be a really interesting question, or a really interesting statement, rather. Anyone have any thoughts on that? You can take a moment if you need.
Oh.
One of the things I get from this too is, you can debate on this with God, but I think in my own personal life, and I think others were, I got tired of fighting with God because my arms are just too short to even fight with God, and to kind of just let it be. Like I always pictured myself when I would have these crazy tangible arguments with God, I just picture myself as like the really short guy and a big guy just holding me back, and I'm just swinging my arms. Like I'm not having any effective making myself tired, instead of just letting it go and not fighting with that faith, I guess, if that makes any sense.
When I read this, I'm thinking that aside from my personal beliefs, I know of many atheists who are such good people, and their goal, they would probably say, relationship with other people and compassion and helping the world, but they would not call it God, even though in a way I would say it's God, but they would not call it such. So I would say that this statement is really, up for discussion and debate in that sense.
You bring up such a good point here, Sandy, and I think it came up in a couple of other ways too, of like what is meant by God, right? Like Cornelia, you were bringing that up, like, hey, this God in this passage right here, that's not the God that I relate to, right? And God has become such a loaded term, in part because one, like you said, Jay, we don't talk about faith all that much as a people. We generally feel fairly uncomfortable with that. And a lot of adults do. Two, because a lot of the conversations that we've had about God in our lives were conversations that were pediatric. Let me tell you a story about something that happened in the Torah, right? And as we get older, we say, hey, that little bedtime story doesn't speak to me in that same way. I can't believe in that. But maybe it wasn't meant to be. Like God wasn't meant to be literally understood as having a conversation with Abraham in that moment. But is there something within there that maybe we can relate to? A lot of us don't realize that within the Torah, there are at least 72 different conceptions of God. And some we relate to and some we don't. Some of us feel comfortable using the word God. Some of us feel completely uncomfortable using the word God. And that's okay, right? A little bit earlier, a few people were saying that younger generations say that they don't believe in God. My question to that is always, who is the God you don't believe in? But that younger generations don't have faith in the same way. And I think that actually is not true. I think that younger generations are simply using different words. And so what's really interesting is how do we have conversations that make it open wide enough so that we can reach one another? Because like you're saying, Sandy, I have friends who these are not the words that they're going to use. That doesn't speak to them. But clearly the values and the relationships and that which makes us better people because we're connected to something larger than ourselves, that does resonate for them.
Yes. Mhm.
If you look at all the Jewish surveys, there's more and more people who don't write down being Jews of no religion, as were in the Pew studies from 10 years ago, but they actually write down spiritual and just Jewish, which means there's new language that's kind of going, like people might not want to relate to the God that they're hearing in these stories, but they do really want to relate to spirituality and deeper connections using different words. So just a few things to keep in mind. I'll get off my little soapbox. Any other questions or thoughts about this before we look at some more text?
A lot of the conversation I have, when I talk about God, is where people will say, if there was God, why would he allow children to be murdered? If there was God, why would there be cancer? If there was, if there was God, why would he send a tsunami to kill 100,000 people, right? I hear them arguments. And I always go, I don't believe in that God neither, but I believe in the God who sent the rescuers. I believe in the God who gave us the ability to learn how to make chemotherapy. I believe in that God who gives a drive to human beings to help. We want to help our neighbors. Like, that's the God I believe in. So when they don't believe in that certain God, I go, oh, I don't believe in that God neither. So we're cool. I get you. I do believe in these other, I bring up examples of how we help one another, and that is our job. So I agree with them when they say that stuff, and that kind of opens the door to having a better conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Frank.
I like what Alan Marinas talks about, the immanent God and the transcendental God. I like that. The immanent God is present, is there with you all the time. The transcendental God is more wispy. I like that. I like that connection. Yes, because it's not, you can't define the transcendental God. I like this idea that God is in nature everywhere. So I connect that with righteousness. When I was listening to everyone talk, the idea of righteousness, yes, it means do good. And if you have a connection with God, whichever one of those 72 directions, the definitions, that is righteousness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I love that description of God as a wispy God. I have to hold on to that one. Hadn't heard that one before, but I like it. So let's look at just a few more things, looking at the time. One is a verse from Deuteronomy. So this is actually getting to our Torah portion. We really haven't looked at our Torah portion so much yet. So this is just one short verse. Remember, we're at the very end of Deuteronomy. Moses is offering his final words. He's about to watch the people go into the land of Israel without him, and says, the rock, whose deeds are perfect, yet all God's ways are just, a faithful God, never false, true and upright indeed. And looking at this verse, it begs a question. What does it mean for God to be described as faithful within this verse? Why is that important? What does that mean?
Well, how can you place trust in an unfaithful God? The idea of faith means
No.
trust. You can only trust in someone who is faithful.
I think it's talking about the relationship between God, the mutual relationship between God and man. And the God needs man and man needs God.
You're bringing in a little bit of Heschel, right?
It's a little bit of Sherman. I know you're right. Yeah. And
Heschel,
you're
Abraham
right.
Joshua Heschel wrote two
Right.
different books, right? I
Yeah.
mean, he wrote many, many books, but he wrote one book that was Man in Search of God, and another book that was God in Search of Man.
Yeah.
And it really is speaking to exactly what you just said, Michael.
Yeah.
Read both.
So here, faithful is really talking about relationship, right? It's not saying the people need to have faith in God, but God, whatever. Like, God will do whatever God wants, right? There's a mutuality that is coming forth and that Moses is expressing in his final words. God is on your side. God is there with you, right? You have faith in God, but know that God also has faith in you. That's a pretty powerful statement to be able to end with, right? And throughout our Torah, there are quite a few examples of the people rebelling against God and demonstrating a lack of faith in God. I can make an entire Torah study, or probably an entire month of Torah studies just on those texts, right? Of Jews saying, not so convinced. And this happens from, just a short time after the Jews witnessed the miracle of being led out of Egypt to right there at the very end of our Torah, where this is demonstrated. So I picked one piece. This happens to be a piece that's right after the Exodus. If you remember, the Exodus starts like the people are singing Mi Chamocha in Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, celebrating God's help in freeing them from Egypt, starting in 15 verse 1. So this is just verses later. Right after the song, we come to this piece. Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went on to the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That's why it was named Marah. Marah means bitter. I think we got that connection, right? And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to God, and God showed him a piece of wood, and he threw it in the water, and the water became sweet. There God made for them a fixed rule that they were to put to the test. God said, "If you will heed your God diligently, doing what is upright in God's sight, giving ear to God's commandments and keeping all of God's laws, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I, Adonai, am your healer." So we have the people immediately saying, well, we can't even drink anything. And there's all these grumblings. Maybe we should go back to Egypt, right? And God responding by saying, essentially, I know you're scared. I'm here for you. I ask you to have faith in me, and I will also be there for you. So we see like this relationship slowly going, but that relationship is tested. It's tested many, many times throughout the Torah. The people do something that's wrong. For instance, the incident of the golden calf, right? As for that sinful thing that you have made the calf, I took it and put it into the fire. This is Moses speaking here, talking about what had happened years before. I broke it into bits and ground it thoroughly until it was fine dust, and I threw its dust into the brook that comes down from the mountain. Again, you provoked God at Terabah and at Massa and Kibroth Hatava, all different incidents. And when God sent you on from Kadesh Barnea, saying, "Go up and take possession of the land that I am giving you," you flouted the command of your God, whom you did not put your trust in or obey. As long as I have known you, you have been defiant toward God. Moses is holding them accountable and saying, hey, this is about relationship, right? You didn't put your trust in God. At a moment that was difficult, you could have chosen to put your trust in God, but instead you chose to go a different way, and there were consequences for that. Now you're about to go into the land of Israel. Put your trust in God. So, it really is getting back to this idea early on of bitachon, that trust here, faith here. It's not about saying, one, I believe that there is a God. Two, this God looks like this. Three, like, it's not, these are the various things that you need to believe. These are the statements that everyone needs to sign on to. It's not that at all. It's, as Rabbi Catherine was talking about earlier, it's one of personal relationship. It's one of deepening our relationships. And sometimes in a marriage, in a friendship, in a deep relationship where we're really honest with one another, sometimes we push each other. We have to bring up things when something doesn't feel right, right? If we really trust each other, then we can bring that up with one another in a meaningful way. And through those conversations can actually develop even closer trust. That is what Moses is talking to here. Okay, so just one more thing, and I'm going to pause so that we can just chat. Rabbi Judith Edelstein offers this text about Moses. Moses is a different story. The complexity of the relationship between God and Moses is firmly planted in the Midah of Emunah in the book of Exodus. They test each other at the burning bush. Moses challenges God, God reassures him. Moses runs away, but eventually God prevails. And the seeds of Emunah are sowed between them. We see God coaching Moses each time God sends him to Pharaoh. God and Moses talk to each other frequently and with intensity. Each soon recognizes the other's strengths and weaknesses, and they provide one another with compensatory support, not unlike new lovers. Moses' confidence in himself increases as he realizes that he can rely upon God and vice versa. As their relationship matures, their emunah in one another fluctuates, yet deepens over time. So do you see that in Moses' relationship, or does anyone want to challenge that a little bit?
It's a pretty awesome way that she has of saying that, I think.
What specifically is striking you, Jessica?
Well, that I liked, God coaching Moses, Moses challenging God, God reassuring Moses. They have a back and forth, but yet they each perhaps have trust in the other that they can do that and it'll work out in the end. It's like a really good marriage.
So one way of I see this, especially with what Jessica just said, and also the person before her, is that this is a relationship in which both parties are changing.
It's dynamic, absolutely. And we leave room for that. Okay, I'm noticing the time and I put too much in here. Let's just include this final piece from Deuteronomy in this portion. And God said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will assign it to your offspring. I've let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross there." And it's kind of an interesting component to bring into Emunah. The fact that Moses and God had such an incredibly deep relationship, so much so that the final verses of the Torah say that there's no prophet like Moses who ever lived or ever would live, that they had this unique, really, really close, special relationship. And yet, that doesn't mean that Moses gets everything that he wants. Right? But that Moses ends of his life, he's treated with respect. He's given this opportunity to see his dreams come into fruition. Even if he doesn't get to go into the promised land, he watches as the people do. And so what is faith? Faith isn't doing everything that someone wants. Faith isn't always saying yes. Faith is about being in dynamic relationship, is about being real and sincere, about being respectful. So what I want to do is just go to these final questions as we close up today. And these questions were largely taken from the end of this chapter in the Musar commentary. What obstacles stand in your way of living a life that's based on emunah? And this doesn't have to be the understanding of God that we just read within the Torah. It could be different understandings. Can you imagine seeking God with all of your heart and soul? What would it look like to live with more emunah? And what would it take for you to do that plan and to put this into action? Does anyone want to talk to any of these questions?
You know, thank God I am healthy, but for those who have certain medical conditions and they have always had great, emunah in their lives, it's probably acceptance of the condition that they're in that may not be treatable and whatever, and an acceptance that they are not going to live forever. This is something that's difficult, I would think, to come to grips with, but I'm thinking that always having emunah is not necessarily so easy for any of us as our lives progress. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I think that goes back also to what Frank was talking about fighting and being kind of held back, right? If we're fighting against what is, we're not getting anywhere. But if we accept it and go forward, maybe we are. Yes, Steve, go ahead.
This made me flash back to almost 10 years I worked in hospice. And the people that I was with when they were literally breathing their last, who were most at peace, were those who had faith.
Wow.
And there's one particular individual that I was never forget till my last breath, how much at peace he was. He wasn't afraid. He understood it was just, the whole picture was incredible. And also, if I may say, Rabbi Lee was like that. I was with him at the very end also. And I really came to understand that all the words that had come out of his mouth that I understood for these previous 35 years that I knew him, that he really believed. They weren't just words to him, for what it's worth.
Thank you, Steve.
I would say one of the things that has in my life stand in my is when I see people that are not doing the right thing, or people that are using God to be hateful, and I see them still being prosperous and happy, and I go, wait, that used to really make me question faith sometimes. And I'm blessed now that I have a belief that I say that their path, and I have nothing to do with that now. But I know that for a long time that kind of made me question faith when I see people, being hateful, using God, or just doing the wrong things, but still being prosperous. And I say, wait a minute, I thought, and that used to make me question faith until I learned that it's my faith in me, that I have to stay out of that way, and I have no control over that other human being or what they're doing. But that was one of the things that used to make me question faith, was that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and those are two really big challenges that we might face, right? Seeing things that just don't seem just and right within our world, both because people who are doing the wrong thing sometimes prosper, and also the other piece of that was just brought up, right, is that bad things happen to really good people, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. And when those things happen, yeah, we might question our faith. Or we might question faith because the kinds of ways in which God is being portrayed sometimes within our tradition don't resonate exactly for us. So the question that we leave with as we finish this year of studying Torah with Musar is really, what does faith look like for us? And how can we deepen it within ourselves in ways that does make sense and that does bring deep richness into our life, as Rabbi Edelstein said earlier in our text study. And if we can reflect on that, I think that we might be able to end this year with a little bit more strength. So I know it's 2:03, it just turned 2:03. I apologize for running late, but we need to finish this with 3 really important words, because this is the end of our Torah study for Musar, and we're going to start a whole new study starting next week, right after Simchat Torah. And so there's 3 words that we always say when we finish. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Strength, strength, and may we continue to strengthen one another. Thank you so much for all of these incredible studies over the year, and I'm looking forward to studying Haftarah with all of you starting next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Rabbi.
everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.